I'm Satoli. Welcome back to another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. Today we're in Dearborn County, Indiana, covering a story that started 200 years ago. Check it out.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming out. My name is Valerie Michael, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Indiana Archives and Records Administration. So I'm not sure if you know, but 200 years ago to the day, last Friday on the 10th, was the 200th anniversary of the first day of the 1816 Constitutional Convention in Corydon. So in 1815, a census was taken reflecting that there were 63,000 settlers living in the Indiana Territory, which allowed them to apply for statehood. So they did this, and Congress passed legislation in April of 1816, introduced by our territorial delegate, Jonathan Jennings, who would go on to become our first governor. And just weeks later, on May 13th, elections were held in Indiana's 13 counties to select delegates to the convention. So you can imagine it was a bit of a scramble to elect people to go to this brand new state to get to Corydon. But they did it, and only 4 weeks later, on June 10th, the 43 men met and determined that we would become a first state, that we would first become a state, and we would write our first constitution. So on the second day of the convention, the delegates voted upon a motion to create a new state and write a constitution. The vote passed, but it wasn't unanimous. It was 34-8, and the 8 dissenters, in typical Hoosier fashion, were worried about taxation. They were worried that if they weren't a territory anymore, the federal government supports the government of a territory, but upon statehood, the Indiana taxpayers would have to assume that burden, and they didn't think that Indiana had the tax base to take that on. But they lost, and we became a state anyway. So there were committees. They were made and determined by the president of the convention, again, Jonathan Jennings, and in only 3 weeks, the delegates finalized their work and wrote our Constitution, adjourning on June 29th, which is why we're having these delegate memorial events all month from June 10th to June 29th. The state's first Constitution included 3 branches of government, didn't have an attorney general, and it was the first state constitution to have an expectation of free education for all citizens. It also banished slavery and involuntary servitude. Interestingly, the Constitution was never ratified by the citizens of Indiana. Instead, it was sent to Washington, D.C. directly for approval. Nonetheless, on December 11th, 1816, Indiana became the 19th state. The Constitution of 1816 stood until the Constitution of 1851, which is our current state constitution. Happy 200th birthday, Indiana, and thank you. Today we're here to honor Ezra Ferris, one of the delegates that signed the 1816 Constitution. We're here in the Greendale Cemetery. He was originally buried in the old Lawrenceburg Cemetery. There was a flood, and they had to build the flood wall, so all of the old Lawrenceburg Cemetery was relocated here. The headstones were relocated in the early 1940s. And the Greendale Cemetery has generously provided a new marker for Ezra Ferris because his was lost to time. So thank you. So a little bit about Ezra Ferris. Some of his family's grave markers are in this area also. He was born in Stonewich, Connecticut on April 26, 1783, and arrived in Fort Miami, which is in Ohio, in 1789. He was a doctor and a Baptist minister, and he moved to Lawrenceburg in 1806. In 1816, at the Constitutional Convention, he was the chair of the Committee on Elections. He was also a member of the Legislative, Executive, and General Revisions Committees. He served in our first state Senate from 1816 to 1819, and he was in the State House from 1820 to 1822, 1826 to 1827, and 1830 to 1831. He ran for U.S. Congress in 1822, but he lost by 5 votes. He was a charter member of the Indiana Historical Society, And he died on April 19th, 1857 at his home in Lawrenceburg. At the time, in 1857, only 4 delegates lived longer than him out of the 43 that attended the 1816 convention. He's originally, like I said, was buried in the old Lawrenceburg cemetery, but was relocated here to the Greendale Cemetery. He was only 33 at the convention, and he was 74 when he died. So you might be wondering why you're holding those flags. So those 2 flags, the Indiana flag and the United States flag, flew over the Capitol in Indianapolis on Memorial Day of this year in 2016. And those 2 flags will be visiting the ceremonies that we have for all of the delegates throughout this month. So they'll visit all of the delegates who are buried in Indiana. There are 5 who aren't buried in Indiana, but we'd like to eventually make it to where they're buried. And in 2018, as part of a signature Bicentennial project, the state is building a brand new state archives building in downtown Indianapolis, and those will hang in the atrium of the new building along with copies of the 1816 Constitution and the 1851 Constitution. So thank you for being part of the ceremony. I'd like to take a picture of everyone with the Indiana flag. Got it. James Dill, for whom the town Dillsboro is named in this county, we're having it at the courthouse today because we can't have it at his gravesite. He was born in Ireland in 1772. Not a lot of the delegates most of the delegates were born in the United States, but he's one of the few that wasn't. He arrived in America after the Revolution and lived in Pennsylvania until 1803 when he moved to Dearborn County. He married Arthur St. Clair's daughter, and he represented Dearborn County at the 1816 convention along with Solomon Manwaring and Ezra Ferris. In 1803, he was the first ever Dearborn County recorder and became an attorney in 1807. In 1810, he was the prosecutor for Dearborn County, and he was the lieutenant colonel for the Dearborn County Militia 3rd Regiment. He was the territorial speaker of the House in 1813, and then was again the prosecutor for both Dearborn and Wayne County. He was colonel in the Indiana militia and fought with Wayne, and was clerk of the court in Dearborn County again from 1813 to 1838. At the convention, he served on the impeachment committee, the rules committee, the militia committee, and the attorney general committee, and he was a member of the judicial committee. In 1816, after the convention, he became the brigadier general of the territory militia and was secretary of the Senate. He was a very, very busy man. He was recorder in 1817 again, and clerk of court again in 1818 and 1823. He died in Lawrenceburg in 1838 and was 66 at the time of his death. He was 44 at the time of at the convention. So in the 22 years that he was alive after the Constitution, you can see his accomplishments were numerous. So a little bit about Solomon Manwaring. This is where he's buried. We're going to go visit his grave after I make my remarks. He is believed to have been born in Delaware on September 29, 1776, and was one of the 3 delegates from Dearborn County, including James Dill and Ezra Ferris. Manwaring's father bought land in Clark County that would later become Dearborn County. And in 1801, Solomon joined him, and they're thought to have been among the first settlers in this area. He married the sister of Delegate Robert Hanna, who's buried in Indianapolis, and Manwaring was a lawyer, judge, and surveyor, who in fact surveyed and platted the town of Brookville in what would later become Franklin County, and was elected to the Legislative Council in 1809 and 1810. He was a judge of the Court of Common Pleas in 1811, and was an associate judge in Dearborn County in 1814. He was also the Dearborn County coroner. And in 1816, when he was 40, he was one of the 3 delegates from Dearborn County to go to the Constitutional Convention in Corydon. He was a member of 3 committees, Bill of Rights, Existing Laws and Courts, and the Banking Committee. And after the convention in 1816, he would serve as the Dearborn County associate judge until 1830, which is a long time for a lot of these delegates. As you can see through the years, they didn't hold a lot of these jobs for a long time, so for him to be judged for that long is impressive. And he died on February 11th, 1836 at the age of 60, and he's buried here.
Thanks for watching another edition of History in Your Own Backyard. And remember, travel slowly and stop often. See you next time.